On January 23, 1959, 10 young hikers set out on what should have been an adventure of endurance, determination, and camaraderie. They were students and graduates of the Ural Polytechnic Institute, strong, experienced, and confident in their ability to conquer the frozen ridges of the northern Ural Mountains. Their leader, Igor Dyatlov, was admired for his discipline and precision. They were young, full of laughter, carrying guitars, journals, and cameras alongside their ice axes and skis. Snow crunched beneath their boots as they left behind the comforts of Sverdlovsk, unaware that every step forward was leading them toward a darkness history would never fully explain. The winter was merciless. The Ural winds howled like predators. Temperatures fell to -30 degrees Celsius, the kind of cold that steals breath, that bites at flesh, that makes shadows linger longer in the snow. Yet to these hikers, the mountain wilderness was both challenge and sanctuary. They documented everything: photographs of smiling faces framed against white peaks, diary entries that spoke of exhaustion but also pride. But the photographs, frozen forever in film, carried something else too. Behind the smiles, in the blurred corners of the frames, snowstorms looked less like weather and more like veils. Dark ridgelines cut across the horizon like scars. And in the nights, as they huddled together in tents, the wind carried sounds that seemed almost alive, distant howls, groans that did not belong to ice alone. For days, their path was steady. They moved through forests where the trees stood silent like ancient watchers. They crossed valleys where fog rose thick and unnatural, clinging to their clothes like invisible fingers. One by one, they wrote in their journals, leaving fragments of their final days. Then, on January 28, one hiker, Yuri Yudin, fell ill and turned back. He left reluctantly, unaware that fate had just chosen him as the sole survivor of the Dyatlov expedition. 9 remained, pushing deeper into the white wilderness. The mountains grew harsher, the sky darker. Their final destination was Otorten, but they would never arrive. Instead, their trail would vanish into snow and silence. Weeks later, rescuers would discover a torn tent, frozen bodies, and evidence so strange it would baffle investigators for decades. But before that, there were still moments of laughter, warmth, and life. The last entries in their diaries speak of playful arguments, songs sung in the cold night, and a confidence that they would endure. They didn't know that each word, each photograph, each laugh would become relics. Fragments of a story that would never be complete. And somewhere in those mountains, as they camped for what would be the final time, the wind shifted. It carried not just snow, but something else, a whisper in the dark, unseen, waiting. The frozen journey had begun, and it would end in terror. The group pressed deeper into the frozen heart of the Urals. Their skis cut through snowdrifts that swallowed the landscape, leaving only white horizons and endless silence. Each day brought exhaustion, but also a sense of pride. They were not just surviving the cold, they were conquering it. Their journals recorded the small victories: firewood collected after hours of searching, songs sung at night to lift tired spirits, laughter over jokes that cut through the howling winds. Yet between the lines, there were shadows of unease. The cold was worsening. Storms were stronger. And each night, the wilderness seemed more alive. On February 1st, they pitched their tent on the slope of a mountain the locals called Kholat Syakhl, the mountain of the dead. Why they chose such an exposed place remains a mystery. They were experienced enough to know better. A forested valley lay below, offering shelter, but they stopped here, halfway up a barren slope. That night, the diary entries grew shorter, sharper, more practical. No more long jokes. No more warmth. Just survival notes. One of the hikers jotted down a chilling phrase, "We now know, snow is endless." The storm closed in, swallowing their voices and erasing the sky. Inside the tent, 9 people lay side by side, their breath rising in mist, their bodies pressed together for warmth. Beyond the thin fabric walls, the mountain groaned with the weight of ice and wind. At some point, transmissions, faint and broken, were reported by distant monitoring stations. Nothing official, nothing confirmed, only fragments of voices carried on strange frequencies. Static filled the gaps, but to some listeners, it didn't sound like static at all. It sounded like whispers. And then, silence. This was the last time the Dyatlov hikers were known to be alive. The next morning, no one would hear from them again. Their families waited. Days stretched into weeks. Search teams were dispatched into the white wilderness. But when rescuers finally reached the mountain, what they found was not simply a campsite abandoned by cold and fear. It was something much worse. The tent was torn open. Not from the outside, but from within. Inside lay boots, coats, food supplies, untouched. As if 9 people had suddenly fled into the snow, leaving survival itself behind. Barefoot tracks led away from the camp. 9 trails pressed into the frost, stretching into the trees below. But the tracks ended in silence. And soon, bodies began to appear in the snow. The rescuers who stumbled upon the Dyatlov camp never forgot what they saw. The tent stood battered on the frozen slope, half buried in snow. But it wasn't the weather that had destroyed it, the fabric was slashed open, long knife marks ripping from the inside out. Whatever had driven the hikers from their shelter, it came from within their own hands. Inside, their belongings were arranged neatly, boots, jackets, food, maps, and diaries. Everything they would need to survive in sub-zero temperatures, left behind. No one abandons such essentials unless terror outweighs reason. The searchers followed the tracks downhill. Bare feet and sock prints pressed into the snow, as if 9 people had fled barefoot into the freezing night. The footprints showed no sign of struggle, no signs of being chased, only an urgent march into the trees below. At the forest edge, the first bodies appeared. 2 men lay beneath a cedar tree, stripped to their underwear. Their hands were torn and bloodied, branches above broken in a desperate climb, as if they had tried to escape something, or to see something. The snow around them was blackened, remnants of a small fire. But it had not saved them. Their skin was frostbitten, their bodies twisted in agony. Further along, 3 more bodies were found. Dyatlov himself among them. Their position suggested they had been crawling back toward the tent, as if regret had struck too late. Their faces were frozen mid-expression, fear, exhaustion, and something else, something unspoken. But it was the remaining 4 who would reveal the darkest clues. They were discovered months later, buried deep beneath snow in a ravine. And what the rescuers saw turned mystery into nightmare. One had a fractured skull, another broken ribs, injuries so violent they resembled a car crash, yet there were no signs of an avalanche, no collapsed trees, no crushing debris. Their bones were shattered, but their flesh unmarked. And one woman was found without her tongue. Another, missing her eyes. As investigators stood in the freezing ravine, their breath rising in pale clouds, the silence was unbearable. The bodies were wrong. The explanations didn't fit. And the mountain seemed to hold its secrets tighter with every gust of icy wind. Rumors spread quickly. Soldiers at the recovery site whispered about strange burns on the clothing, traces of radiation that made Geiger counters crackle. Others spoke of glowing orbs seen in the skies over the pass that winter, lights that flickered and disappeared like something watching from above. But the most unsettling detail lingered in the snow itself, the tracks that had begun so clearly, 9 shadows pressing into the frost. Somewhere in the middle of the forest, they simply stopped. As if the hikers had walked not into the woods, but into thin air. The Dyatlov hikers' remains painted a picture that no official explanation could resolve. The searchers described it as walking into a nightmare, each body telling a different story, and none of them fitting together. The 4 bodies found in the ravine were the most disturbing. They lay beneath several feet of hard-packed snow, as though the earth itself had tried to bury them. But when uncovered, their injuries defied logic. One had ribs caved in as if crushed by an immense, invisible force. Another had her skull split wide, but without a single mark on the skin. The woman missing her tongue seemed almost ritualistic, her face frozen in silence. And the others bore strange burns, patches of fabric on their jackets glowing faintly under ultraviolet light, as though scorched by something beyond ordinary fire. Even the clothes told stories of desperation. Some wore pieces stripped from the dead, socks, coats, sweaters layered haphazardly. Yet despite the frigid cold, others remained nearly naked. To investigators, this hinted at paradoxical undressing, a condition in extreme hypothermia where the body overheats in its final moments, driving victims to tear off their own clothes. But skeptics argued, hypothermia doesn't shatter bones like a car accident. Theories collided. Some whispered of an avalanche, but the slope was too shallow. Others blamed local Mansi tribesmen, but no footprints suggested an attack. Radiation tests fueled talk of secret military experiments, perhaps parachute mines exploding silently in the night. Then came the stranger ideas, UFO encounters, infrasound waves that drove the group into panic, even supernatural forces said to haunt the mountain, a place the Mansi people called Kolatsayakal, the mountain of the dead. Yet among all the reports, one detail chilled the investigators most, the expressions. Frozen in the snow, many of the hikers' faces were twisted in terror, wide eyes staring upward, as if they had seen something no human was meant to witness. And though their bodies were recovered, the mystery of their final steps was not. The pass itself grew silent again, snow swallowing the traces, as if nature had conspired to erase the truth. But rumors continued to spread, and even officials seemed unsettled. For every theory that tried to close the case, new evidence clawed its way back, forcing the question open again: what really happened on Dyatlov Pass? The Dyatlov Pass incident has inspired decades of speculation, each theory trying to force the puzzle into place. Yet the more answers people search for, the stranger the mystery becomes. Some point to the official explanation, an avalanche. In 2019, Russian authorities reopened the case and declared that a sudden wall of snow crushed the tent, forcing the hikers to escape into the night. But those who studied the scene argue the slope was not steep enough, and rescuers reported no avalanche debris. If snow had fallen that night, Why were the hikers calmly cutting the tent open from the inside instead of struggling to dig themselves out from beneath it? Others insist the hikers wandered into the wrong place at the wrong time, a Soviet military test zone. Parachute mines, radiation, and secret weapons might explain the glowing burns on their clothing and the violent internal injuries without external wounds. But if that were true, the truth remains buried in classified files that have never been fully released. A more modern idea whispers of infrasound, low-frequency vibrations caused by rare wind patterns in the mountains. Such sounds can trigger panic, nausea, and even hallucinations. If it happened that night, perhaps the hikers fled in terror without knowing why, running into the blizzard until death claimed them. Yet this theory cannot account for the crushed bones or missing tongue. Then there are the stranger suggestions, villagers reporting orange orbs of light in the sky the same night the hikers died. Some believe they encountered something not of this world, a presence their terrified expressions hint at but never reveal. And still others cling to darker, human explanations, murder, sabotage, or betrayal from within their own group. But no footprints from outsiders were found. If it was murder, it left no trace except horror. In the end, every theory explains something, but not everything. Each answer leaves cracks, gaps, and doubts. Perhaps that is why the Dyatlov Pass has never been solved. The truth may be too terrifying to fit into a single explanation. And perhaps the mountain intends to keep it that way. And so, more than 6 decades later, the Dyatlov Pass remains a wound in the white silence of the Urals. 9 young lives ended, but not in a way that history could explain. No avalanche, no weapon, no single theory can account for the fractured bones, the missing flesh, the radiation, and the fear frozen onto their faces. The Soviets sealed the files. Investigators walked away. But the snow never forgets. Every year, hikers return to that cursed slope, leaving flowers, crosses, and questions. Some swear they feel watched. Others hear whispers in the wind. On certain nights, the pass glows with strange lights, the same eerie glow reported the night they died. The Dyatlov mystery is not just about 9 missing lives. It is about the unknown itself, the cold, dark reminder that nature, secrets, or something else entirely still holds power beyond our comprehension. And maybe that's why the story endures, because in the end, what terrifies us most is that we may never truly know. This was the Dyatlov Pass Incident, the night the mountain took 9 souls, and gave back only questions.